Hello, welcome back to another show. We're going to be continuing with the temptations of the early spiritual life. Today it's going to be a little off the book. These are going to be things that I think are important, but they're not necessarily described by Saint Teresa and Saint Bernard as their own categories, I guess you would say, but they're things that keep coming up. So I want to mention them. They're super important. And then I do want to get into talking about Saint Ben or not Saint, not a saint yet, maybe one day. Pope Benedict XVI's thoughts on Western culture. I'm reading this book right now. Just talking about because obviously an interesting pope, very intelligent pope, and I was talking about him I think yesterday or 2 days ago. Kind of, he's very smart, very intelligent, but I think there's a couple places where he has huge blind spots. And I know Michael Jones has talked about this a little bit, but I just want to dive in. But it's cool. He's talking about myth making for in politics and power, different things like that. So I want to dive into that. So we'll get started. We'll get into it. Just real quick on the temptations today, but these are super important. So one of them is going to be this idea, and this is so prevalent in my anecdotal experience, but the association between prayer and consolations in the Christian life. And Saint Teresa of Avila, she's going to be very specific with this. She's going to say, when you're praying or when you're entering the spiritual life, you should not be looking for consolations, which consolations are, these uplifting experiences of God's presence, whether physically manifested or spiritually manifested, the deep peace and emotional experiences as well could probably be categorized in there when you're praying. I think everyone who has prayed has probably experienced some sort of elation or other benefit that is directly related to prayer. I don't know, maybe even healings would be categories under that, but they're probably their own category as well. Not that so Saint Teresa of Avila says we should not be looking to receive consolations in prayer. And this is actually a really bad place to be in if you're looking for that. And she even includes levitations and different things like that, which I think most of us don't have to worry about, and visions and stuff. But she's saying we need to basically, and I don't know if it was her, Saint Bernard, or someone else. They're basically saying, oh no, this is Saint Alphonsus Liguori. He's basically saying like we should ask that we don't receive these things. So we just have pure faith instead of have faith because God gives us these consolations. But I think this is really important because a lot of people, when they're praying, I hear this too in real life. When people are praying, they're like, oh, I'm not feeling anything. I'm not feeling God's presence, or he's not giving me those good feelings. And that's a dangerous place to be because God essentially in the beginning of the spiritual life, he's going to give you those consolations to try to wean you off of the world, the flesh, and the devil, of those sins, of those mortal sins, of those addictions. So in prayer, you're going to get a bunch of consolation. But after that, and this is the same for human, kind of for human love too. It's you don't want someone to just love you because you keep giving them gifts. You want them to just love you for you. So God is going to really purify us by, as we continue in the spiritual life, maybe in the beginning, there's a lot of consolation, but once we are firmly established, he's going to kind of draw those away. Not that they're never going to happen again, but he's going to draw those away so that we can kind of become more solid in our spiritual warfare, in our spiritual battles, in our spiritual health. So we don't need consolations to solidly be in the service of God. And so Saint Teresa of Avila is specifically going to say is we should not ask for consolations or look for them, but we should look in prayer to conform ourselves to God's will. So the desire in prayer is not to receive whatever these gifts, it's to align ourselves with his will, to be united to it. And I think I made a video on God's will, but that is the essence of holiness, is conformity with God's will, uniting ourselves to God's will. So that's one part. Hopefully that really helps, because I hear that a lot. Why can't I feel God? Why am I not experiencing what I used to experience in prayer? It's good. Now you're getting into the real meat and potatoes of the spiritual life. God is refining you. And then if he feels it necessary, like, and actually Saint Teresa of Avila talks about is like, and we'll talk about this later probably, is like everyone is meant for the spiritual marriage, which is like the final stage of the spiritual life in this life. And that seems to be filled with a lot of consolation, but very intense as well. But that's later on, and for a lot of people, it's years and years of the spiritual life. So don't be looking for that right now. You got to be faithful, and do good things for the Lord before you can even start thinking about that. So that's one. And then the second, and again, these are just themes that are throughout. So that first one is temptation to just desire consolations in prayer. The second point, let me look at my notes real quick. Oh, is this balance concept. So this is something that is very important too, that's not really talked about. I will say in our culture, we're a very mercy heavy culture, which this idea is basically like all you hear about is God's mercy, God's mercy. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. God's mercy, God's mercy. And then even in Protestant circles, you'll have just like, you could argue it's mercy or not, but they're like, you're once saved, always saved. You'll have universalists saying like everyone's going to heaven. Popular people, Bishop Barron, von Balthasar, big proponents of this, is like, it's possible that there's universal salvation. We should hope for it. And it's like very, sunshine and rainbows kind of theology, in terms of salvation. And then, and then I'll stop with that's the couple of the people that believe in that. And you'll see that a lot in the culture. A lot of people, even that aren't Christian or aren't Catholic, be like, "Oh no, don't worry, everyone is saved. God's mercy." An agnostic belief in God, God's mercy, or even like a pantheistic, like everyone's going to return back to the source, so we don't have to worry about it. Everyone's going to be good after. So that's like that mercy heavy, and we're in that right now, I'd say. And this has probably happened before. And then the other side of that, the flip side, is the kind of like a Calvinistic, but also this has happened in Catholic circles, like Jansenism. I'm probably saying that wrong. Jansenism was a huge proponent. Is like, no matter what, it's gonna suck. God's punishment is coming down on us. We are so screwed. Sin is overwhelming us. Sin is overwhelming me personally. There's no way God will forgive me. I need to grit my teeth, work harder, torture myself because God's mercy is not great enough to forgive me. So those are the two extremes. And nowadays, I really mostly hear the mercy heavy side. In the past, I've seen, historically speaking, a lot of emphasis on the I guess you could call it the justice or the hell perspective. And so Saint Teresa of Saint Bernard, I want to be very clear, is like, no, you need to have a full understanding of your sinfulness. And this is going to help you not have presumption. That's the key word there, presumption and pride. So if you don't have an awareness of your sinfulness, you will just presume you're going to heaven. And I see this a lot. People are like, "No, I don't do anything really wrong." That's not good. And again, this will help you to avoid presumption and pride. If you just are on it, not like over exaggerating or anything, but like just honestly aware of your sinfulness and your faults. But they're like, you also need to be aware of God's mercy. And if you're aware of God's mercy to a healthy extent, you will avoid this despair and this fear of God, fear of punishment that can kind of be crippling to people. I see this less nowadays, but I'm sure it still happens. And this might be related to scrupulosity. People have scrupulosity. They think that, everything they do is a sin. That might be more related on that side. But Saint Teresa, Saint Bernard is like, you need to have both. It is not just like, oh, just think about God's mercy all the time. Or it's not just all think about your sinfulness and hell all the time. It's like, no. Have a healthy understanding of both. Never lose sight of either of those things. That is a good attitude to have in the spiritual life. So that might sound obvious, but honestly, from my experience, when I look out into the world, it just seems like people are mostly picking that mercy side, but really just picking a side and just running with it, which honestly just becomes like an ideology at that point. So those are the two that I wanted to discuss very briefly, very short, wholly very straightforward. So, be reflecting on that. Do I seek consolation in prayer? And that's the only reason I'm going to prayer. And then the other one being, am I overemphasizing mercy? Am I overemphasizing hell and punishment and sin? Or am I balanced? Am I healthy in those? Those are things to bring to prayer for sure. And the book that I'm reading. So if you need more help with that, go to that or go to the saints directly, go to the church fathers directly, because they honestly they have it down pat. They're the only. I know obviously you can read modern stuff. I always it's a little exaggeration, but I'm always like, just read the church fathers and you'll be good. Read Thomas Aquinas and you'll be good. But modern people are great too. That's what I have with that. I want to get into Pope Benedict. Pope Benedict, again, very he's smarter than I am, no doubt about it. I just think he has a couple of interesting points and a couple of maybe spots where he has some blind spots, which I'm sure I have blind spots too, but these are his blind spots. And he grew up in a totally different age than me, and then us, probably if you're the same age as me. So we have different blind spots just based on what's going on and what we're able to comprehend, grasp in our own struggles. So one thing he brings up, which I thought was really cool, because he's talking about politics, which is interesting. Everyone's freaking out because we have a tendency, it seems it's changing now, but Catholics have a tendency to be like, I'm Catholic, I'm spiritual, man, so like I don't care about politics, and that's just not that's just not how it goes. That's never been how it has been in terms of the church's history. So people might be shocked, but Pope Benedict, yes, he has a book. It was written when he was cardinal, actually 1 year before he was pope. Cardinal Ratzinger, 2004, I believe. Um, but he has a whole section on politics in this Western culture book. And in this, and this is the more specific thing I want to get into, in this, he talks about myth making in relation to politics. And this is invaluable. I wish I had known this before. I've always been very into politics, but if you don't understand this concept, you will get caught up in so many different lies that are being just pressed upon you by the culture and by not just by like a passive culture, but by like active people. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. You will get caught up so hard, so easily. So he's talking about myth making, and it's this idea that people that are in power that do not care about the truth and care about control, they have a high that's not the right way I want to say that. They will naturally be to benefit their own interests. They will create myths to support the structure that they want in society. And this can even be done by people and for systems that people think are good. So an example is the American myth. So America has myths that we've built up as a country to support and uphold the structure that we have, the republic, or the American empire, whatever you want to call it. So among these myths is like these are founding fathers. I mean, even that phrase is part of myth making, like the founding fathers of America. Kind of like this graying out of who the or the church fathers, the founding fathers were, their lives, their beliefs, kind of the situation that was happening in 1776. Like, oh, the British were just pure evil, and the founding fathers are just pure good, and like these different myths. The crazy parts of this myth, like America is like this grand experiment, like a republic has never been tried like this before, and all it's like, like these crazy things is just not true. There are some things that are unique to America, and I don't want to harp on it too hard, but just these things are just not true. If you know any history, and it is interesting, if you know any history, you'll know that a lot of these claims are just not true. But it's really interesting in like school, in like a public school, the teaching of history before 1776 is very brief and just awful. And it's almost like they want to paint like everything before 1776 was just terrible, horrible, suffering and death. And then America comes around and it becomes like this one beacon of hope in the whole world, and there's no other good place to live. And if you travel any bit to any half decent places, you'll find out it's like America is special, and there are specific things that only are part of America, but then there's also other places that are very fantastic and great to live in for their own reasons and for similar reasons to America. But anyway, to say all this to say that there's myth making going on all the time. And find a lot of people get caught up in the myths. There's Protestant myths. There's even Catholic myths where people can like take. I'll give you an example one. This might not be exactly Catholic myth, but like for some reason Catholics feel very vulnerable when Protestants are like, "Oh, you don't know the Bible," and like the Mass doesn't have the Bible and all this stuff. So there's this myth that goes around that Catholics will say, and I hear it all the time, where Catholics would be like, "Oh, if you go to daily mass every day, you'll hear every part of the Bible in like 3 years or something like that." And that is not true. That is a myth. That is a insecure myth that probably some Catholic made or maybe a Protestant made to like undermine us or something. Um, it is a myth to maybe insecure about, you know, the Bible not being in the mass or something. I don't know. But so everyone tries to, and especially if you have an ideology, right? Someone's insecure in their faith, or they're insecure in their country's founding, or insecure about the way a leadership or leading parties are ruling their current country or community or whatever. They'll create these myths to cover up for it and to form the minds of young people. Because if you have a good myth, you can really like kind of seamlessly get young people into your faction, into your system. So Pope Benedict mentions this myth making is very important. I see, people I know, my friends, acquaintances, people online, everyone gets caught up in these myths and they're not willing, they don't, because you get emotionally attached to the myths. So if someone's like, let's discuss it, you get a little like you get a little twitch and you you get angry and you're not able to defend it. You just are able to lash out because it's your myth. It's become a part of your thought process about the way you see the world. So he's talking about that, and I think that's really cool. But then one thing, so he's talking about different reasons for myths and different powers in the world. And I think he's missing some very big parts. Um, and maybe he's like underestimating the power of money and capital, and also like the organization of certain powerful groups and people nowadays. Like, what's a good example? I mean, obviously the Israel thing today is a good example of that, and I know for a fact that Pope Francis seemed to be willing to talk about it more, but I think he talked about it more in like more of a liberation left wing ideology sort of way, where he was very okay calling out the Israel the nation for the Palestine stuff, but he was calling them out more in a like an oppression thing, which is to a certain extent probably true. But that's a very left wing. Not that left everything left wing is bad, but like that's a very left wing liberation way of looking at that. And so for me, Poe Bennett, he's saying these things like I should have wrote them down, but these broad things like, well, what was an example of that? I can't even remember, but he just seems to be missing the fact that like there's these very powerful groups and figures in the history, not even just modern history, but like even going back. You could even go back to like the Medicis. And I'm not talking about like the fake Medici stuff you see nowadays, but like the Medicis were a powerful family. And there's a certain way they wanted cities and governments and the papacy to be run. And they would put a lot of power and effort into that. And that is true today. And the church before in the past, even when sometimes they were involved, like a pope was related to super powerful rich groups, the church has always been really good at calling out power and wealth in that way. And nowadays, like Pope Benedict becoming the pope, having a lot of difficulty calling out these different people and these different groups and really understanding the political sphere. And maybe they did understand it, they just didn't want to say it because, they're in a higher platform than I will ever be, in a higher position than I'll ever be. But I know for myself, it is a little frustrating to kind of see that, because if you see some of the popes and I'm especially talking like 13th century to like 17th, 18th century, they call people out. They call out these groups heavily. And this is going to, a couple examples, this is going to be the Muslims they call out, The Jews they call out, the Masons they call out, secret societies in general they're going to call out. Um, and even as their power waned and no one was really caring what they said, they would still call them out. Um, so yeah, so when I see that from Pope Benedict, I'm like, yes, there's myth making and stuff, and nations and governments do that. And he talks about Hitler a lot. He really goes back to Hitler. He was raised under Nazi Germany, so that's going to obviously really affect his view of things. But I'm like, there's other people besides Hitler that did this myth making stuff, and that's happening right now. And it seems like he's unable to identify where those myths are coming from. And he seems maybe hesitant, or he just doesn't is not aware of like how heavily the media and especially money in media is affecting things. Because media, you have to take media for what it is. Media nowadays is, there's individual creators like me right now. I mean, I could even be paid by Russia or something. You wouldn't know unless you looked into it. But these heavy duty newspapers, television channels, even YouTube channels, they have a position and they're run by very rich, powerful people. And these rich, powerful people, unless they're just told, I haven't seen one yet, but unless they're just totally dedicated to the truth, they're going to push their angle for their own benefit, for their friends' benefit. You can see this a lot with the Trump administration. CNN usually is bashing Trump or like a right wing person, but they're not bashing Trump now. It's like, why would they do that? Is it just because they're like, oh no, Trump just has it. He's following the truth and he's doing the good all the time. It's like, no, it's because whoever runs CNN is probably satisfied with what Trump is doing right now. And when they're not satisfied, they will rev up the machine again to start talking trash about him. And it's not a direct one-to-one to the truth. It's a direct one-to-one to what the owners of CNN want to support. So that is a very real thing. And this is something I love. GK and Hilaire Belloc, they were on the money on this. They were snipers. They saw this coming from 10,000 miles away. GK Chesterton is always joking about, the papers, he had introduced an article to the papers because he's a journalist, and the owners of the papers like, oh, that just won't do. In their polite British way, like, oh, that just won't do. It's like, why won't that do? GK is one of the most popular writers in England. People are going to read his stuff no matter what, because they are pushing a specific position. So I just want people to be aware of that. I see those myths working. And it's not like, I expect even myself like to have all the myths eradicated from my brain, but we just need to be aware of those things. We can be smarter, we can be politically smarter, we can make decisions in a more intelligent way if we know this is happening. I honestly, just to be honest with you, I didn't even know about myth making in general until I was maybe like 25, 26. It wasn't something that was taught to me as a possibility. I was like, oh, Fox News is telling the exact truth all the time, or this XYZ person is telling the truth all the time. Even in 2016, it's like the possibility that Trump might be lying about something was like not even in my brain, because it was like, he wouldn't lie because we would call him out, right? But obviously that was not true. Yeah, hopefully that was kind of a little rant, and I feel like I hit this same subject, but it's just the thing I see every day. So I just keep going back to it. Anything else with B16? I like when people call him B16, Benedict the 16th. It's kind of a cool nickname. I think that's it that I had today. A little rant at the end, but that's okay. Remember those two potential temptations I talked about in the beginning. That's the most important part. But yeah, I think that's it for tonight. Please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think about the show. If you want to argue about something, please let me know. I don't got a lot going on right now. You can notice I'm doing shows in the daytime now. I don't want to tell you what I do for a living, but I have a lot of downtime. So if you want to argue, now is the time. Now is the time. Anyway, God bless you. God be with you. And I will see you. I will see you next week. God willing. Good night.